Please welcome our panelists, Camila Matthias Moraes, Chief Operating Officer at Brex, Sri Santanam, he's the Executive VP Analytics and AI at Experian, and Dr. Hui Wang, Senior VP of Global Analytics and Data Science at PayPal. Thank you so much for joining us. So I joined Bloomberg Intelligence in 2015, and it happened to be one of those landmark years after almost half a decade of behind-the-scenes advancements that we saw. There were a couple of nerdy factors that there was an article about it, and suddenly what people realized is that cloud computing infrastructure became very cheap. You had a lot of readily available data sets, things that were not being able to quantify earlier were being able to be created into data. And that was part of the reason why that year kind of was a very instrumental year. And neural networks went from becoming prohibitively cheap to becoming very accessible and relatively cheaper. 9 years in, and I've transitioned from covering banks to fintechs now, and alongside technology has kind of evolved, and we've come from there to here. Sri, let me start with you. We're just talking about this. How have we transitioned from the early era of AI to where we are today?
That's a really interesting question. Obviously, the topic du jour seems to be generative AI. As I think about the horizons we've been through, I think what we're seeing is something which was very valuable and very expensive has suddenly become very cheap and accessible, right? And if you look at the history of the technology, if you will, there have been 3 or 4 horizons where this has happened. The first was the personal computer. I remember my grandfather was a fantastic mathematician. He could do a bunch of arithmetic in his head, and the personal computer disrupted that. And then, of course, we saw the internet, which disrupted information exchange. It used to take a lot of time for us to get information across, and now we've disrupted information exchange with the internet. And then the third horizon, fairly recently, we've seen the last 8 or 10 years, is pattern recognition. We've seen the times when you heard the target could predict from their data how a teenager was pregnant before their family knew about it. And that was pattern recognition, right? So what are we actually seeing now? Like, what has become really cheap, or the potential to become cheap? And if you ask that question, it's quite profound. It is probably the most fundamental level cognition, like thinking, and the ability to process unstructured data. Now, what we're seeing is the early days of it, and it's very scrappy, and it kind of works in certain areas. But like when you're using generative AI with customer service agents, that's what it's doing. It's taking the initial part of taking that unstructured information and effectively automating some of that thinking, which is profound, right? So I think we're in a world right now where it's very early days, but if the promise of generative AI in fundamentally disrupting cognition plays out, its applications are tremendous. It'll start with productivity. Like in the early days of the internet, there were these internet companies, right? Like now there's no internet companies. Every damn company is an internet company.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think there's generative AI use cases now, but we'll, I think, see a more fundamental shift in how cognition embeds itself in all of our product services and starts to disrupt business models.
Well, I mean, one thing I can confirm for sure, I get a lot of questions right after results. Why is the stock behaving in the opposite direction? And when I've asked some of these questions to my counterparts on the investment industry, they're like, the reaction is completely on a different planet now, partly because of the way algorithms have been kind of running on these markets. So again, back 10 years ago, when I would ask this question about to banks about how are you using AI in your workflows or in your organizations, I think the most hilarious part is they'd say we are using it for our chatbots. And as a banks analyst, I'd be like, how does it even matter? Like, it's not like the core function of a bank to basically be a chatbot, but I think over the years, we've seen a lot more deeper applications come through, be it in credit risk management or be it fraud mitigation or algorithmic trading, even in wealth advisory for that matter. We've gone back and forth with robo-advisors, but at least a lot more banks were now interested or willing to kind of adopt a hybrid model, if not go full robo. So from that point, and we're still talking about those use cases, right? What I wanted to understand is how, what part of your business is AI really supercharging? Like, where are you seeing the most bang for your buck? Maybe we can start with you, Hui. Is it understanding consumer behavior? Is it fraud mitigation? Is it everything? Like, where are you seeing the most bang for your buck?
Yeah, so I think as PayPal being a pioneer in this online digital payment space, cybersecurity or fraud detection is really the first use case that we are able to capitalize big time from advanced AI in terms of protecting our customers and ensure a clean ecosystem within our platform. And we've been doing that almost, again, since day one of PayPal, where it's still mostly using the more traditional statistical method. And then around the time 2009-10, we evolved into leveraging a lot of advanced AI. And of course, recent years, because of this availability of generative AI, it brings new challenge and also new opportunity for us to also continue to beef up our fraud detection capability. So this is an area, actually, again, like I said, we are capitalizing and benefiting so much from advanced AI and the latest generative AI area.
So it's interesting that you said that it's presented more challenges than opportunities. Would you say that? Like, Sri, like, talk about deep fakes, talk about the perpetrators as well have kind of advanced along the way, right? So where are you seeing more challenges and you're able to overcome those challenges with AI?
Yeah, at Experian, we've had a history of using artificial intelligence for over decades. And probably the biggest area where it's produced impact has been in fundamentally how we use our data to help our clients evaluate underwriting our customers, the core models. Historically, these models were largely basic logistic regression models, and now with machine learning and advanced AI, you're able to create a much more inclusive environment. So it's better decisions for consumers and better decisions for financial institutions. So that's an area where we see a tremendous amount of impact. I think if you look at the fundamental challenges which we see with AI and generative AI, it's really drawing that balance between innovation and what it can do and responsibly using that to drive impact with consumers. For us at Experian, we take that extremely seriously. And if you actually look at underwriting, for instance, regulation requires us to be able to explain every decision to a consumer in a very specific way. So it naturally limits how much and the sophistication of black box algorithms you can put against that.
And we will discuss some of that a little bit more in detail. I mean, just think about it, right? The previous credit decisions that a traditional bank underwrote was on the basis of financial documents that you provided them, all the official data work that you could. And a lot of people did not have official documents. They were not even legitimately employed, so to say. Access to credit has kind of been, it's come a long way with the rise of fintechs and the use of technology to kind of use alternative data sets to underwrite credit. And that obviously is a big milestone for the financial industry. But coming back to my previous chatbots example, Camilla, how is the chatbot of 10 years ago different from now? And you've done a lot of work around different applications, right? Be it internal and external users. Please talk to us about that.
No, yes, definitely. So I work at Brex, and there are two applications that I think are very interesting. One is our Brex Assistant, which is a product that we launched for the markets like last year. And one of the main things that we discussed internally is like, okay, how are we going to market this Brex Assistant if you can just go and reach out to support and you're already going to have like the normal chatbots there. But the assistant is completely different. The idea is, so one of like the most common combos at Brex is companies buy the card plus the expense management. And one of like the challenge of having those two things is like, okay, no one likes collecting the receipts for like all the trips and like how do you get like the expense reports, all of that. So we facilitate with like taking pictures, etc. But with AI, we were able to just connect, as an example, the calendar of like each user, and like from there already like creates like the memo of like saying, hey, I'm getting an Uber for like this meeting, this external meeting with like person XYZ, and you don't need to do like anything else. From a manager capacity, the assistant allows with AI to see, okay, how many folks were actually there, what is like the budget, what is the policy for like that specific individual, and fully approve the transaction, a few things that we were not able to do in the past. So it completely went above and beyond the idea of like, hey, the chatbot is there to answer a question, but you can actually have an assistant to do things for you, and like things that were in the past like very manual and time consuming.
I'm sure that's music to a lot of folks who remembers doing their T&E and trying to figure out where the hell is that receipt. So I think I've definitely felt that benefit, like coming from there. But we promised the audience to sift the hype from the reality, so we need to get there. By the way, I'm not sure how many of you remember tracking this news piece about Amazon walkout checkout technology. There was a news article, and there was some controversy around that. So basically, the company claimed that it allowed customers to bypass traditional checkouts as an achievement powered entirely by computer vision. And the technology was, in fact, backed by 1,000 people sitting in Asia. I'm not saying that. This is a news report. And there just appears to be imminent hype and almost sort of a pressure to do everything with AI. Like, how do you even decide if this problem is worth solving with AI, or is it just like a simple automation problem? Or so, again, like, separate the hype from the reality. And this will be a quick one answer from each of you. What is the most overappreciated and underappreciated uses for AI?
If I may, I think given the past, 18 months, all this craziness around generative AI is more like a hype than like like a reaction. So I would say some of the previous panelists talk about, we are all looking at the potential in using generative AI to improve our productivity and efficiency of our workforce. So developer productivity and efficiency is one of the very big topic within that. And we've done experiment, by the way, and see very promising results. It seems like with a good co-pilot, our developer efficiency, the time it takes for them to code can be reduced by anywhere like 30+%, right?
Okay, so that's but what is the overhyped thing about AI?
But then you realize, you know what? Developer only spend a fraction of their time coding. There are a lot of time spent in understanding product requirement, coordinating across different teams, things like that. So until we can use generative AI to address every step in this process, we're not going to see 30% efficiency gain from the overall developer community. So that's really getting over the initial hype.
Shri.
Yeah, I'll switch gears now. I gave my fire and brimstone AI is going to change everything speech. If I look at generative AI, last year, for all the fun and glory, was mostly a year of POC. Most people were in POC land. And
aren't we still there?
Ish.
Okay.
I think the thing about generative AI is it's actually quite easy to produce something which feel like it might be a real product. It might actually work in 1 or 2% of the cases. When you actually start taking it to production and scale, you start to see a couple of big things. Oh, I created this search chatbot which will help my customer service agents actually answer questions better. Well, how many agents are actually using it?
Absolutely.
How many agents actually go use the website instead?
Absolutely.
Right? And you actually start to see cracks, and then you get into prompt engineering, you start getting to platforms. I had this great theory of this idea which could work, and I created a prototype. I need to put it into production. I have PII data. Actually, to make it work, I need to manage regulation. Oh, by the way, because it hallucinates, it can't give advice.
Oh, yeah, all the bells and whistles.
Correct.
That's like the most common issue, especially with financial institutions, right?
Exactly. So I think the difference between producing a POC, which might show well, to actually driving production at scale and value makes a big difference. I think Alon talked about creating a platform or an operating system. I think that's an important part of what we've done. We've invested in creating a platform and really working through the areas where the impact is greatest. And what you need to be able to do is you do need to allow 1,000 flowers to bloom in POC land, but you need to be ruthless about nipping those flowers which don't make any sense.
Absolutely.
And actually watering those flowers which can truly go into production.
That's a very good point. So I think the AI systems are very expensive to maintain, to develop. Camilla, you're a startup. How do you decide the cost-benefit of analysis for deploying AI for any of these? And also, I mean, from your client's perspective.
Yes, I actually have a very funny example that's happened very recently. Like, we were like trying to consider like, let's do like our new customer risk rating. And because we were like in the hype of AI, and okay, no, let's use like a AI model. And honestly, when I first saw that, I was like, there is no need for that. Why we are even doing like, let's just do a simple framework. And then we got like a bunch of like, I mean, it was not even like Gen AI. It was like just machine learning. It was like this should be just a table stake checkbox. And then I think we spent like maybe 3 to 6 months to develop the model. And then once we are ready to go live, we faced like the issues with the regulators that were like, okay, how are you even doing that? So I think especially like in the tech space sometimes, and being like in the financial service, like the fintech space, you face with the hype that you have to solve all the problems with like that's sometimes very simple problems that you don't even need that, and like that will not even be acceptable in the market. So
absolutely, and I think we've noticed that across like several examples that have come out over the years. Let's talk about some of the challenges now. Like data challenges are like right at the top in that, right? Let's start with security. Third-party LLMs may actually unintentionally reveal confidential data present in your prompts or instructions, and this could lead to unauthorized access, privacy violations, cybersecurity issues. You might even be relinquishing some of your control while feeding your data into a third-party system. So what are some of the risks that you've encountered on that aspect while kind of maintaining and using large LLM models? Sri, maybe you want to kind of, and also like what are the strategies that you can use to mitigate or alleviate some of those issues?
Yeah, actually, it's a really good question. And I think at the core of it, like large language model systems are not deterministic, right? You get asked the same question, you get multiple different answers.
Absolutely.
And so the guardrails around these are quite important. I think in the early days of large language models, you found people saying that in order to use them for a use case, you really had to train the model, which meant that you really had to inject into the model, into the layers of the neural network itself, your data. And that posed many risks because the model could unintentionally be attacked and reveal information you wouldn't want. Since then, of course, there's a number of methods which allow for these guardrails, things like retrieval augmented generation, actually creating compound systems where your data is actually sequestered and there are specific conditions which allow data to be released. And what we have at Experian is we take this very seriously, so we actually have invested in technology to put those guardrails around our LLM systems and to ensure that there's a set of policies and procedures which manage that, which allow us to both use large language models but also allows us to use our data. One final point I'll make on this is I think the thinking on large language models has also evolved. When you looked at the early days of large language models, it was almost the notion that there would be this Lord of the Ring model which would solve everything. It would be all powerful. It would know everything. And there's GPT-5 or GPT-6 or 7 which will do that. The thinking now is shifting, and really the notion of building an ensemble of expert systems as being the solution to problems is much more seen as being much more viable and much more safe and secure. Because then you have, let's say, versus like a large language model which knows everything, if I had a specialized model which was just trained on my customer service data, then I would be much more confident about what it could say and wouldn't. And maybe I have 5 or 6 of these and I have that. So I think those techniques certainly help us get more secure and safe.
And basically put a layer of protection in between your data and the LLMs that you're using. So that is one security aspect. Also, data by itself is a challenge sometimes, right? Like not all organizations have long histories of data. There are companies who are still new, who are young companies or startups who don't have enough data. Are there any means to deal with those sparse data sets? Are there any technologies? I mean, we've talked about a lot of alternative data sets, but is there anything to kind of bypass that issue?
So I think when it comes to data challenge, I'm assuming that you will all echo, like biggest challenge we have is like there are a lot of data, but they are like everywhere. They are very distributed. And then that causes like a sparse data problem here. But you know what? If we are able to look at the whole data ecosystem together, it may not be sparse at all. It's actually it's very, very dense, right? So there is a big challenge around data is how do we make sure there's a data convergence so that, again, we can create this almost like connected network. Then the sparsity actually, like most people are connected actually, right? So you have less of that problem by itself. But then, of course, there's also governance. Like as a fintech company, we treat privacy and responsible AI front and center. How do we make sure we can apply all those governance around our data? And then in order to leverage data to deliver value, and there's a whole suite of questions around how do we discover data and how do we use the data. And there are, again, a lot of tools becoming available through generative AI to help us along those lines. So these are all kind of interesting problems around data, I guess, we need to solve. And again, in machine learning, we always say junk in, junk out, right? So we want to make sure, again, we have good data that fits into a very powerful LLM.
That's a really fascinating thought, though. And for a moment, it reminded me of once what a doctor told me. When you get hurt, like if your brain gets hurt and there's a part of the brain that stops working, there is another part of the brain that actually overcompensates and addresses those problems. It's something like that, yes, that we kind of mentioned. Shri, anything that you would share in terms of addressing sparse data or data quality issues?
Yeah, I think... I don't know who made this comment previously, which I agreed with, which it was probably Alon. Actually, bad data or incorrect data is a lot worse than sort of no data. I think a lot of the sparse data questions mean, for us, having the right guardrails on when to decide what decisions to make and when to just not make a decision. And if you look at one of the challenges with large language models, like they make up stuff, right? And so you could give it very sparse data and it'll actually like seem like very intelligent and give you information. So I think an important part of tackling the sparse data challenge, the more obvious piece, of course, is to go get the data. But I think more importantly is having the right guardrails to know the situations where you don't have enough information to make a definitive choice, and then ensure that those are appropriately compliant with your systems.
Understood. I think that's a very good segue into the other part of the problem, hallucinations, right? Precision is very important for sensitive industries like healthcare, like financials. Camilla, do you have any examples that you can share where you've run into issues with precision or hallucination and how you've kind of mitigated some of those problems?
Yes, I think in financial service, we need to be very careful. And I would say, I think it's beyond being very careful, right? Precision is a must. People are trusting you with like their money. They need to know where the money is coming from, where the money is going, like where this transaction is going to be booked. So one of like the dream big ideas is like, what if we could just close the books for like an accountant way quicker, right? What if we could use like AI to actually, we have integrations with like ERP systems. So we have like all the transactions, all the invoices paid with like our platform. And like then we just tie and like save hours for like the accountant. But if this is not done with like perfect precision, like then you get in trouble. I mean, then you're not closing the books correctly. So what we try to do on the other end is, okay, if this is not an area where we feel that we're ready yet to add a lot of value to our customers, what are the other things that we can do? And going back to my initial example with like the Brex assistant and like having the memos auto-completed and like having like the responses that you could leverage in the platform to save time for the managers, what we do is we allow the user to see what our platform is suggesting and to select, yes, like this is exactly what's happened here. So in that way, we are not like actually helping closing the books, but we are still saving a ton of hours in like some manual tasks that is slightly different. So I think the challenge for the industry right now, while we are still improving like all the models, is like how you can still be creative, because there is still like a lot of like good things that you can do, and like all of us have been playing with like Gemini like for the last months, right? So how you can still be creative and add value without compromising core data, core payments to the customer.
So I think that's a fair point. Like, thinking about it from another lens of challenges, right? Like privacy. That's, in your case, it's the clients willingly providing that information. But in cases where you're actually collecting data, and I wanted to cite a recent news report that came out, cookie maker and bakery franchise Crumble is getting sued over sharing customers' financial information with their payment processor, Stripe. And Stripe had incorporated its wiretaps in Crumble's websites, allowing the processor to record mouse movements, clicks, keystrokes, IP addresses, physical location, financial location. And even though Crumble gave this information to Stripe to access and protect itself from fraudulent transactions, but it's still a very fine balance. It's a very delicate kind of nuanced way to think about this. How do you strike that balance and leverage the power of AI without really compromising on privacy for clients? Sri, do you want to kind of bring in any examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing is to have a clear and visible framework for how you make some of these decisions. And the challenge you often see in situations like you talked about, if there isn't a risk management or a governance framework, and you're largely going through processes of incremental sort of innovation, which all makes sense, but then ultimately the only way you look at the risk and management and the governance around this is when something like this happens. So I think probably the most important thing is to start with a framework which lays out a set of principles and says this is what we're comfortable sharing and not under these circumstances.
And who decides that framework?
Well, I think anyone can, but what you actually need is to establish a governing body which actually does that. It can be a combination of technologists, product engineers, but there has to be that responsibility and accountability in creating that framework. I think Andrew spoke about the Risk Council or the AI Council that they had established, which I think is a kudos to them. I think a thoughtful step. But that simple but powerful mechanism put in place with the right folks looking through can go a long way in really managing the risk and ensuring largely that you're working in alignment with the policies that you have.
Absolutely. So,
Dr.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Like some kind of council or steering committee, like our responsible AI steering committee has people from both first line and second line, like first line data analytics AI people, as well as the first line product managers, portfolio managers. And then there is a well-established second line program. And in this like a partnership across all these teams to vet the policy and making sure we have the right policy and the right process and balance things out.
I think so. The point that I'm hearing is that we need to bring in the compliance and governance folks on the table much sooner rather than developing the product and then telling them, hey, how does it look, right? That's the point we're kind of moving towards. That's great. I think we're kind of running to the close of time. So before we end, I think let's discuss I'm not going to talk about us losing jobs from AI and like how everyone's kind of worried about. I think there is a general consensus that AI will augment our lives, the way we work, what kind of problems we kind of work on. Camilla, do you want to share a little bit more about how you're preparing your workforce to be prepared for or leverage AI to become more efficient?
And I expected a question like this. I mean, I run operations, right? Whenever you talk about AI, questions like that come around. And I actually went to check the data from my team. And one of like the main things that the team have been asking, and I'm even talking about operators, like the very first line of like defense, or even like agents, is how they can leverage AI. So I think for me what is very important is like, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I am like in a tech company, but at least the way that people are seeing this is like, okay, how can it actually make my job better and how I can be more productive? And I even think from like the customer perspective, it's definitely different in different industries, okay? So every industry has to deal with this in different ways, but at least the way that I see is there is so much that we can gain from like business productivity by allowing and empowering like our teams to leverage AI to be more effective. And like that's the mindset that it's not only like what I try to tell them, but that's what they are seeking for. So, and like that's also like what we sell to our customers in the end of the day, right? Leveraging not only like our financial infrastructure, our software, but like even like our AI solutions to getting like the business more effective.
What are you doing with your team? How are they kind of looking at it from their day-to-day workflow?
So I think actually as an AI practitioner, this is actually a very, very exciting time for us. So I think we are at the point now that the technology is there, but it still takes people and time to make sure every part of the life and every part of the society that we can benefit from this very cool piece of technology, and our life will be dramatically different once we complete this journey. So what I told my team is really embrace it, right? So we are really lucky to be at this time, and then embrace it and then use it. And I think some of the prior panelists also comment, right? We want to get rid of all those things that can be automated so that we can all put our brain and our time in something much more interesting and generating much more valuable things for the whole world. So yeah, in general, just embrace it.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're close to the end of our session. I had a couple of more things, but we'll probably discuss that during our networking. Thank you so much. I hope this gave some food for thought on what you really want to do to embrace AI, as Dr. Hui just mentioned. But I want to leave you guys with one thought. Is Wall Street really ready for the AI revolution or for the silicon attack, so to say? And I think the other challenge is that AI isn't just automating finance. It's actually fundamentally rewiring some of those fabrics of finance at the core. And it's very possible that the next crisis will not be caused by human greed, but probably by an algorithm that we can't understand. So just give it some thought. And thank you so much for joining and staying with us till this time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.